The most powerful crime lord in New Haven walked into the most luxurious bar he owned, but no one in that room knew his face. Because the last person who discovered a traitor inside his empire had been killed the night before. The only message left behind contained just 2 words: the Meridian. That night, Sterling Cross sat alone in the darkest corner of the bar, ordered the most expensive cocktail on the menu, and watched. He didn't know that the answer he was searching for wouldn't come from the underworld, but from a bartender with calloused hands, who was secretly slipping a folded note beneath his glass. 4 hastily scrawled lines on that piece of paper would expose a betrayal from within, tear his entire empire apart, and change both their lives forever. If this story touched you, hit like and share it with someone who needs to hear that courage doesn't need a title. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next story. 2 hours before walking into the Meridian, Sterling Cross sat in his private office on the highest floor of a commercial building in downtown New Haven. The room was so quiet he could hear the second hand of the watch on his wrist, moving 1 small tick at a time. Across from him, seated in a leather chair, was Keith Brogan, the former manager of one of the restaurants in the Cross Empire chain. Brogan had once been trusted. Once, until $300,000 disappeared from the books over 6 months, and every trail led back to one name. Sweat ran down Brogan's temple. His hands gripped the arms of the chair, his knuckles white. He'd been talking nonstop for 10 minutes, his voice trembling, his words tangled, caught somewhere between explanation and begging. Sterling didn't interrupt him. He sat still, one leg crossed over the other, his back resting against the chair, his gray eyes fixed on Brogan's face without blinking. His silence was more frightening than any threat. When Brogan stopped to breathe, Sterling finally spoke. His voice was low, even, without the faintest ripple of emotion. From this moment on, every source of income you have in this city is cut off. Your accounts are frozen. You have 24 hours to leave New Haven. If I hear the name Keith Brogan one more time, there won't be a second conversation. No shouting, no fist striking the desk. Just a series of sentences, calm and flat as still water. But every word carried the weight of a sentence that couldn't be appealed. Brogan cried, the sound of a grown man realizing his life had just been erased with only a few words. Sterling had already risen to his feet. He straightened the cuff of his suit jacket, turned his back, and walked out of the room without looking back. The door closed behind him, cutting off the sobbing inside. Out in the hallway, Grant Holloway was waiting. The 50-year-old man stood leaning against the wall, his arms folded across his chest, his usually calm face now covered with a layer of tension that Sterling recognized at once. Grant had followed Sterling since Sterling's father was still alive. He was the only man in the world who dared to look Sterling straight in the eye and tell him the truth without fearing the consequences. If Grant was worried, then there truly was something worth worrying about. Donovan, Grant said, his voice low. He was found this morning in his own car, dead under suspicious circumstances. The police haven't reached a conclusion yet, but we know. Sterling stopped walking. Donovan had been his most valuable source, the man assigned to quietly investigate the traitor inside the Cross Syndicate system for the past 2 months. Someone inside the organization was leaking information to the Malone crew, Sterling's biggest opposing force in New Haven. Donovan had been getting close to the answer, and now Donovan was gone. The last message he sent before he died, Grant continued, handing Sterling the phone. On the screen were only 2 words: the Meridian. Sterling looked at the screen. The Meridian, the most upscale cocktail bar in the Cross Empire chain. A place he'd never set foot in. A place where, according to Grant's reports, the revenue from the past 3 months had shown irregular figures no one had been able to explain. He lowered the phone. 14 years ago, his father had died because the man closest to him had betrayed him. Sterling had been only 19 then, a boy thrown into the middle of a collapsing empire and forced to carry all of it on his shoulders. He looked down at the mechanical watch on his wrist, the second hand still turning with steady precision, the only thing his father had left behind. "Prepare the car," Sterling said, his voice unchanged. "Tonight I'm going to the Meridian." That same afternoon, on the south side of New Haven, inside an old apartment building where the elevator broke down more often than it ran, Jolene Prescott was standing in the kitchen of the small apartment on the 4th floor. The kitchen was so cramped that if 2 people stood there at the same time, they had to turn their shoulders to avoid each other. She was cooking pasta with canned tomato sauce. Dinner was exactly the same as yesterday, and the day before that, and all of last week. Not because she didn't know how to cook anything else, but because this was the cheapest thing she could buy after paying the rent, the electric bill, and the monthly installment to the hospital. In the living room, only a few steps away from her, Becca sat on an old sofa worn thin on both armrests, her tiny feet, not touching the floor, bent over as she colored a picture of a house with a flower garden. She was 8 years old, with brown hair tied into 2 little pigtails, and wide round eyes that always seemed bright enough to hold the whole sky inside them. Every now and then, Becca gave a soft cough. A short, dry little cough she seemed so used to that she didn't even stop coloring. But Jolene heard it clearly. Every time that cough sounded, her hand stopped stirring the pot of sauce, and she turned to look at her sister, waiting. Only when Becca went back to coloring as if nothing had happened did Jolene turn back to the stove. On the small dining table beside the window, a stack of white envelopes lay piled one on top of another. Hospital bills. Jolene had seen them when she came home that afternoon, sitting right in the middle of the table, where Becca could see them. She had quickly gathered the whole stack, straightened it, and tucked it into the high kitchen cabinet drawer, where Becca's hands couldn't reach. She already knew the numbers on those bills by heart without having to open them again. Becca's heart surgery had been postponed twice because they didn't have enough money for the deposit. The hospital had sent a final notice. If the deposit wasn't paid within 30 days, the operation would be delayed again, and no one knew when the next chance would come. 30 days. That number had carved itself into Jolene's mind like a countdown clock, with no pause button. "Jolene," Becca's voice rang out from the living room, clear as glass. "When do I get to go back to the hospital?" Jolene turned around, her mouth forming a natural smile as if that question hadn't just cut straight across her chest. "Soon. I'm taking care of it." "Does taking care of it mean it's almost done?" Becca tilted her head and asked again, innocent and trusting. "It's almost done," Jolene nodded, her voice gentle. She carried 2 plates of pasta to the table. Becca climbed onto her chair, placed her unfinished drawing beside her plate, and pointed to the house in the picture. "Look, Jolene. I drew our house, but I added a flower garden because our house doesn't have one yet." Jolene looked at the drawing. The house in it was 10 times larger than the apartment they lived in, with big windows, green trees, and a smiling sun in the upper corner. She swallowed something that had caught hard in her throat, then said, "It's beautiful. You're such a good artist." The 2 sisters ate dinner in a comfortable silence. Becca talked about the picture, about her classmates, about the cat she had seen on the way to school. Jolene listened, nodded, smiled in the right places, and asked questions at the right moments. No one looking at that scene would have guessed that the 27-year-old sister sitting across from her hadn't slept enough in 3 years, that the wallet in her coat pocket held only enough money for gas tomorrow, or that every night after Becca fell asleep, she sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of bills and working through calculations that had no answer. 7 o'clock in the evening. Jolene cleared the table, washed the dishes, and took her bar uniform from the closet. She sat down beside Becca on the sofa and pulled her little sister into her arms. "I'm going to work now. Mrs. Wilson next door will come over to watch you." Becca looked up, her small hands holding Jolene's hand. "Come home early, okay?" Jolene kissed her forehead. "Always." She stood, slung her bag over her shoulder, and opened the door. She stepped out into the hallway, closed the door behind her. Then she stood there, her back against the wall with peeling paint, closed her eyes, and took one deep breath. Inside the apartment, Becca had gone back to coloring, the soft scratch of crayons moving across paper. Outside in the hallway, Jolene stood alone, both hands clenched around the strap of her bag, her chest rising and falling. 30 days. She opened her eyes, loosened her shoulders, and walked away. The Meridian stood in the heart of New Haven, its black glass facade reflecting the city lights like a massive block of quartz. Jolene came in through the employee entrance at the back, where the heavy iron door opened into a narrow hallway leading to the changing room. She hadn't even had time to put her bag down before Warren Briggs was already blocking the passage. The manager of the Meridian was 45 years old, his hair combed smoothly to one side, his gray suit fitted perfectly, a smile always sitting on his mouth but never reaching his eyes. He handed Jolene a thick stack of invoices. "Tonight after your shift, you stay and fix these. There are a few numbers that need adjusting before the weekend." Jolene looked at the papers. She knew exactly what those invoices were. Pinnacle Spirits, the name she'd seen dozens of times in the books, a company she'd never once seen deliver a single bottle of liquor to the storage room, yet somehow it appeared regularly on every payment receipt. Briggs needed her to adjust the numbers so they matched. She had a finance background. She knew how to do it, and Briggs knew that too. A few months earlier, Jolene had made one small data entry mistake because she'd been too exhausted after a night shift, entering the wrong quantity for a shipment that had come into inventory. A mistake anyone could have made, and one that could have been easily corrected. But in Briggs's hands, it had become proof of theft, a noose he had kept tightened around her neck ever since. She fixed the books for him, or she lost her job, and carried the label of a thief that would make sure no one in New Haven's service industry would ever hire her again. "Oh, and this month I'm deducting another $300 from your pay," Briggs added, his voice light, as if he were reporting the weather. "Supervision fee." Jolene gripped the stack of invoices. Her fingers turned white along the edge of the paper. She didn't say anything. She gave one nod, then turned away. In the changing room, she changed into her uniform, tied her hair neatly, and looked at herself in the mirror, the face of a 27-year-old woman, but the eyes were much older than that. She breathed in, pushed the door open, and stepped into her shift. The Meridian was crowded that night, as it always was. Jolene stood behind the bar, mixing cocktails, pouring liquor, keeping a professional smile on her lips. She moved quickly and precisely, every motion repeated thousands of times until her body could do it without waiting for her mind to command it. Around 10 o'clock that night, a man walked in. He didn't come through the main entrance where the hostess greeted guests. He went straight to the bar and chose the high stool at the farthest corner, where the light fell the weakest. He sat down, didn't call anyone over, didn't look at his phone, didn't seek out the eyes of any employee. He only sat there and watched. In the dim light, he was only an ordinary man drinking alone. No one inside the Meridian that night knew the man sitting in the darkest corner of the bar was the owner of the place. Jolene walked over and placed a napkin in front of him. "Good evening. What would you like?" Her voice was steady and polite, the same voice she used for every customer, whether they wore a $100,000 watch or shoes worn thin at the soles. Sterling looked up, his gray eyes meeting her amber ones for one brief second. "The Sovereign," he said. "The most expensive cocktail on the Meridian's menu. $200. Jolene didn't frown, didn't glance at him in judgment, didn't hesitate. "Of course, I'll make that right away." She turned back to the bar, took the base liquor, measured with exact precision, and began mixing. Her calloused hands moved with practiced ease, every gesture clean and efficient. She placed the glass in front of Sterling, gave a small nod, then stepped away to serve another guest. Not one unnecessary word. Sterling took a sip. His eyes weren't on the drink. They were on her. About 20 minutes later, the door to the VIP room inside opened. Briggs stepped out, his eyes sweeping quickly over the bar with the habit of a man who needed to control everything. His gaze stopped at the dark corner at the end of the bar, where the glass of the Sovereign sat in front of a man he didn't recognize. In the dim light, Briggs saw only a strange customer sitting alone, with nothing especially remarkable about him. He didn't recognize Sterling Cross because the true owner of the Meridian had never set foot here before, and Sterling was a man very few people outside the organization knew by face. But Briggs recognized the glass of the Sovereign. $200. In the darkest corner of the bar, from a customer who wasn't on the VIP list, he moved quickly toward the bar and stopped Jolene in a hidden corner behind the liquor shelves, where the guests couldn't see. He grabbed her wrist and squeezed just hard enough that she couldn't pull free, his voice low and sharp. "You let some nobody order the Sovereign? If he skips out, that $200 comes straight out of your pay. Do you understand me?" Jolene lowered her head. "I understand, Mr. Briggs." He released her, straightened the lapel of his suit jacket, and turned back toward the VIP room, that polished smile returning to his mouth the moment he stepped into the customer's line of sight. In the dark corner at the end of the bar, Sterling Cross had seen everything. He hadn't heard what Briggs said, but he saw every detail clearly. He saw the way Briggs grabbed the girl's wrist, saw the way she lowered her head, her shoulders drawing inward, her eyes fixed on the floor, saw the fear in the way she stood, the kind of fear that belonged to someone who had endured too much for too long, until it had sunk into her posture, into the way she made herself smaller so she would take up as little space as possible. Sterling set the glass down, his gray eyes narrowed. He still didn't know who this bartender girl was. He didn't know her story. He didn't know what she was carrying, but he recognized something painfully familiar in those amber eyes when she lifted her head and continued mixing drinks as if nothing had happened. It was the look of someone trapped in a cage, with no way out. For the rest of the night, while her hands kept mixing cocktails, pouring liquor, and wiping down the bar, Jolene's eyes kept being pulled back to the dark corner at the far end of the counter. The man sitting there had been there for more than an hour, and he hadn't changed his posture once. He wasn't drunk. The $200 glass of the Sovereign was still more than half full, and he took only small, slow sips, as if the drink itself was only an excuse to remain seated. He didn't scroll through his phone, didn't look around for anyone he knew, didn't order anything else. He only sat there and watched. His gray eyes moved slowly across the room, stopping at each table, each employee, each hidden corner, then sweeping on again. Jolene had served thousands of customers since she started working at the Meridian. She knew how to tell the difference. Customers who came to drink looked at their glass. Customers who came to show off looked around to see who was watching them. Customers who came because they were lonely looked at their phones. But this man didn't belong to any type she had ever seen. He looked at everything as if he were reading it, as if he were calculating, as if every detail in this bar was being recorded somewhere inside his mind. There was something in the way he sat, his back straight but not stiff, his shoulders relaxed, one hand resting on the bar, the other holding his glass. The posture of a man used to controlling the space around him without needing to appear as if he was controlling it. Jolene didn't know who he was, but she knew one thing for certain. He didn't belong to the Meridian. He wasn't one of Briggs's regular customers. Wasn't one of the VIP faces Briggs flattered every night. Wasn't part of the finance crowd or the lawyers or the politicians who usually sat in the back room. He was an outsider. And that was exactly what made Jolene's mind begin to turn. She knew Briggs was doing something dirty. She wasn't only guessing. She knew, because her own hands had altered those numbers. Invoices from Pinnacle Spirits, a company she had searched for online and couldn't find an address for. Couldn't find a website for. Couldn't find a phone number to contact. Yet every month it appeared in the books with payments worth tens of thousands of dollars. Money flowed out, but no goods came in. The liquor in storage didn't match the quantities on the receipts, and those discrepancies vanished into an account Jolene had only seen as a number, never as a name. She had wanted to speak out for a long time. But to whom? The police? She didn't have hard evidence, only numbers in her head and memories of invoices Briggs always took back after she finished adjusting them. Her coworkers? No one at the Meridian dared touch Briggs. A lawyer? She didn't have enough money to hire a lawyer for lunch, let alone a lawsuit. She looked at the man in the dark corner. He was an outsider. He belonged to no one. He owed Briggs nothing. If he was someone who could help, someone who could get the information to the right people, she would have a chance. But if he wasn't, if he handed the note to Briggs, if he was a friend of Briggs she didn't know about, if he read it and threw it away, she would lose her job immediately. And Becca would lose her surgery before the 30-day clock even had time to finish counting down. Jolene set a glass down on the bar and looked at her own hands, the calluses in her palms from 5 years of carrying trays, the small burn on her index finger from the espresso machine, her nails cut short, unpainted, the skin at her fingertips dry and cracked. These hands had done everything they could do. Washed dishes, mixed drinks, carried trays, mopped floors, signed loan papers, filled out hospital forms, washed Becca's clothes, cooked meals from the cheapest things in the supermarket, everything. But it wasn't enough. It had never been enough. She lifted her head and looked across the bar. Briggs was in the VIP room, the door closed. The other employees were busy serving customers. No one was looking at her. Jolene pulled an invoice from the order pad and turned it over. Her hand trembled as she held the pen, but she wrote, fast. Her handwriting was small, tight, slightly slanted because of the shaking. The liquor here is fake. Briggs is laundering money through this bar. The real books are under the floor of his office. I'm being forced to stay silent. 4 lines. No signature. No explanation. No begging. Only the truth, bare and dangerous. She folded the paper into a small square and tucked it deep into the pocket of her apron. She could feel it pressed against her thigh, hot and burning, as if she were carrying a lit match in her pocket. She didn't know whether she had just been brave or stupid. She only knew that if she kept staying silent, the result would be exactly the same as yesterday, and the day before that, and every day since Briggs had gotten his grip around her throat. Nothing would change. Becca would still be waiting, and Jolene would still be sinking. The note in her apron pocket felt heavier than any tray of drinks she had ever carried. Jolene took a breath, straightened her back, and walked toward the dark corner at the far end of the bar. Close to midnight, the bar was beginning to thin out. A few tables were already empty, and the servers had started cleaning quietly in the far corners. Sterling was still sitting at the end of the bar, his glass of the Sovereign nearly empty. He could leave at any moment. Jolene knew she didn't have much time left. The small, folded note in her apron pocket had been pressed against her thigh for more than an hour, and with every step, she felt it there, reminding her that she hadn't done it yet, reminding her that she had to. She took a clean glass, mixed another cocktail, and placed it on a tray. Her left hand slipped into her apron pocket, her fingers touching the edge of the paper. She walked toward Sterling and set the new glass down on the bar beside the old one, which was nearly empty. Her left hand began to pull the note from her pocket. At that exact moment, the VIP room door opened. Briggs stepped out, his eyes sweeping across the bar. Jolene felt his gaze like a wave of heat against the back of her neck. Her hand stopped at once. The note slid back into her apron pocket. She picked up the nearest bar towel and began wiping the wood in front of Sterling, her movements ordinary and natural, as if she were only doing her end-of-shift work. Her heart was pounding so hard she was afraid the man sitting in front of her might hear it. Briggs stood in the middle of the bar, said something to a server, then looked toward the counter. 1 second. 2 seconds. His eyes moved over Jolene, over Sterling, over the liquor shelves behind her. Then he turned and walked back into the VIP room. The door closed. Jolene breathed out, softly but deeply. She set the towel down, looked at the closed VIP room door, looked back at Sterling. He was watching her. He said nothing, but those gray eyes were waiting, as if he knew she wanted to do something, and hadn't been able to do it yet. Now or never. Jolene took the new cocktail, her left hand pulling the small folded note from her apron pocket in the same motion. She placed the note on the bar, set the base of the glass on top of it, then gently pushed the drink toward Sterling. "A fresh one for you." Her voice was normal, even, not trembling. 3 years of hiding emotion behind a bar had taught her how to keep her voice steady when everything inside her was falling apart. Sterling looked at her, then looked down at the glass. He lifted it with his right hand, slowly. The small folded note lay on the bar, right where the base of the glass had been. He looked at it for 1 second. His face didn't change. No surprise, no curiosity, no alarm. His left hand picked up the note, folded it once more, and slipped it into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. Then he took a sip of the cocktail, set the glass down, and gave Jolene a small nod. A nod that didn't mean anything specific, and yet meant everything. Jolene turned away. Her legs felt slightly weak as she stepped back behind the bar. She gripped the edge of the sink, breathed, and tried to steady the heartbeat hammering against her ribs. She had done it. There was no taking it back. That note was now in the jacket pocket of a stranger, whose name she didn't know, whose face she didn't know, whose next move she couldn't predict. Maybe she had just saved herself. Maybe she had just destroyed the only job keeping Becca alive. 10 minutes later, Sterling asked for the check. He placed a stack of cash on the bar, the exact amount on the bill, precise down to the last cent. No credit card, no name, no tip. He stood, put on his coat, and walked out the door without looking back. Jolene stood behind the bar and watched him until his shadow disappeared behind the glass door. Outside the Meridian, the New Haven night was damp. Sterling stood on the sidewalk, the streetlights casting his long shadow across the wet pavement. He pulled the note from the pocket of his suit jacket and opened it. The handwriting was small, tight, slightly slanted. "The liquor here is fake. Briggs is laundering money through this bar. The real books are under the floor of his office. I'm being forced to stay silent." Sterling read it once, then read it again. 4 rough lines on the back of an order slip, but every line was a bomb. "The liquor here is fake. The supply chain had been contaminated. Briggs is laundering money. The rat Donovan had been searching for before he died. The real books are under the floor of his office. The location of the evidence, specific and precise. Not a guess, but the words of someone who had seen it. I'm being forced to stay silent." That girl wasn't an accomplice. She was a hostage. Sterling folded the note again and placed it back into his inner pocket. Then he pulled out his phone and called Grant. The phone rang twice. "I need everything on Warren Briggs and a bartender named Jolene Prescott," Sterling said, his voice even and sharp. "Before tomorrow morning." 1 o'clock in the morning, Sterling sat in the safe apartment on the east side of New Haven, a sixth-floor room with his name on none of the paperwork. This apartment existed for the nights when he needed to disappear from every radar, when he needed to think without being found by anyone. Jolene's note lay on the table in front of him, flattened beneath the desk lamp, its 4 rough lines staring up at him as if daring him to act. The phone vibrated. "Grant." Sterling picked up. "Jolene Prescott," Grant began, his voice carrying the exhaustion of a man who had spent 2 full hours digging through records. 27 years old, completely clean, no criminal record, no suspicious ties to any organization. Difficult circumstances. An 8-year-old sister with a congenital heart condition who needs surgery, with costs far beyond what she can afford. Briggs has been pressuring her with a fabricated debt from a small data entry mistake. He's using it to keep her working for free and altering the books for him. "She isn't an accomplice," Sterling said. It wasn't a question. "No," Grant confirmed. "She's a hostage. The only person in that bar with enough financial knowledge to understand what Briggs is doing, and also the only person with no choice except to stay silent." Sterling looked at the note. The final line, "I'm being forced to stay silent." She had written the truth, and she had written it while Briggs was right there in the next room. "And Briggs? Warren Briggs, 45 years old," Grant continued. "He's managed the Meridian for 3 years. His public record is clean. But when we dug deeper, his personal accounts showed irregular cash flow. Large payments coming in from several unclear sources, then moving out through a chain of intermediary accounts. And this is the most important part." Grant paused for a beat. "Those intermediary accounts are directly connected to accounts our finance division suspects belong to the Malone crew." Sterling said nothing for 1 second. The Malone crew, the greatest opposing force against the Cross Syndicate in New Haven. If Briggs was moving money for Malone, then he wasn't just stealing, he was working for the enemy from the inside. "If Briggs is the rat," Grant said, his voice heavy, "then Donovan died because he found him." Donovan had been tracking the irregular money flow at the Meridian for 2 months. He was getting close to Briggs, and someone stopped him before he could report it. Everything began fitting together like scattered pieces, suddenly finding their place. Donovan's last message, the irregular revenue from the past 3 months, the bartender forced into silence, Pinnacle Spirits, Malone. "I need to get into Briggs's office," Sterling said. "Tonight? Tonight?" Grant didn't hide the objection in his voice. "Sterling, we can do this more properly. Send in auditors, find a legitimate reason to open the official books. Breaking into your own bar in the middle of the night is an unnecessary risk. If Briggs knows someone is looking, he'll erase everything before any auditor has a chance to sit down," Sterling replied. "The note says the real books are under the floor of his office. If he finds out the bartender spoke to someone, the first thing he'll do is destroy the evidence, and the second thing he'll do is deal with her. Donovan died because of this information. I'm not letting it die with him." Silence came from the other end of the line. Grant knew when Sterling had made his decision, and he knew that once Sterling Cross had decided, no argument could change it. "Call Shaw," Sterling said. 30 minutes, the back door of the Meridian. 2 o'clock in the morning. The Meridian was sunk in darkness, its black glass facade reflecting the empty street like a giant mirror. There were no warm lights inside anymore, no music, no sound of glasses touching. The most luxurious bar in New Haven was now only a silent black mass in the heart of the city. Sterling and Shaw came in through the back door. Shaw was 35 years old, former Special Forces, the man Sterling trusted with the jobs no one else could do. He spoke so little that there were days when Sterling didn't hear his voice, even though they stood beside each other for hours. But when Shaw acted, everything happened fast and clean, like surgery. Shaw opened the back door lock in less than 20 seconds. Inside, he used a small device the size of a pack of cigarettes to disable the security camera system, putting the whole thing into loop mode, replaying footage from 3 hours before the bar closed. Anyone checking the footage tomorrow morning would only see an empty, quiet bar, with nothing unusual. They moved through the bar area in the dark, past the high stools neatly arranged on top of the counter, followed the employee hallway, and stopped in front of Briggs's office. A wooden door, electronic lock. Shaw handled it in 40 seconds. The door opened. Sterling stepped in first. He didn't waste time looking around the office. He didn't care what Briggs had placed on the walls or on the desk. He had come here for one thing only. Under the floor, Sterling said. The note said the real books are under the floor. Shaw knelt down, shone a small flashlight close to the wooden floor, and searched. In less than a minute, he found a plank whose edge rose slightly higher than the ones around it, near the leg of the desk, where Briggs's chair usually hid it from view. Shaw gently pried the plank up. Beneath it was a shallow, empty space, just large enough to hold two things: a black USB drive and a small notebook with a brown leather cover. Sterling picked up the USB drive and turned it between two fingers. Smaller than his little finger, but enough to hold every secret Briggs was hiding. Shaw opened the laptop he had brought with him and plugged in the USB drive. The data appeared on the screen in the cold blue light of the dark room. The first folder: invoices. Hundreds of invoices from Pinnacle Spirits, each one listing the quantity of liquor delivered, the price, and the delivery date. All fake. Sterling flipped through the notebook at the same time. Inside were Briggs's handwritten numbers, records of the real cash flow. Money from the Meridian flowed out through Pinnacle Spirits, passed through 3 intermediary accounts, then landed in accounts Grant had confirmed were tied to the Malone crew. Money laundering. Systematic, organized, and going on for at least 1 year. The second folder: transactions. A detailed list of every transfer, every amount, every date. The sums had grown larger over time, from a few $1,000s a month to tens of thousands. Briggs wasn't just stealing petty cash, he was operating a network. Then Sterling opened the third folder. The folder name was Insurance. He clicked it and stopped. Inside was a detailed layout of Sterling's penthouse, drawn by hand, marked with the position of every room, every entrance and exit, every security camera. Beside it was Sterling's weekly movement schedule, accurate down to each hour, each location. And there was a list of names, 12 people, the highest-ranking personnel in the Cross Syndicate, along with their private home addresses, license plate numbers, and daily habits. Briggs wasn't only laundering money for Malone. He was selling Sterling himself and the entire organization to the enemy, piece by piece, detail by detail. At the end of the folder was a text file showing the final transaction date. Thursday night, 2 days from now. Malone would pay $2 million in exchange for all the information in the insurance folder. And once Malone had that information, he would use it to attack the Cross Syndicate from the inside. 48 hours. Sterling had exactly 48 hours before everything he had built over 14 years was sold for $2 million. Shaw spoke for the first time since they entered the bar. There's this too. He pointed to a video folder. Sterling opened it. The image came from a hidden camera inside Briggs's office, angled from above and looking down. In the video, Jolene Prescott sat across from Briggs. Briggs was standing, leaning close to her face, his voice clear through the microphone. "You fix these numbers before Friday. If you don't, I'll call your landlord in every restaurant in the city. You won't find work anywhere. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Jolene in the video lowered her head and nodded. Her hands gripped the edge of the chair. Sterling watched the whole video, dragged it back to the beginning, and watched it again. Clear evidence. She had been forced. Not an accomplice. Not willing. A girl backed into a corner who had still dared to write 4 lines on the back of an invoice and push them toward a stranger. Sterling closed the laptop. Shaw looked at him, waiting for an order. "He's selling me by the kilogram," Sterling said, his voice flat. Not angry, not bitter. Only an assessment as cold as the concrete floor beneath his feet. Then he stood. "But not yet. I don't want Briggs arrested. If we take him now, Malone is still out there, and he'll send someone else. I want Briggs to lead Malone straight into my hands. Thursday night." Shaw nodded. No need to ask more. The 2 men left the office, put the floor plank back in place, locked the door, and erased every trace. When they stepped out through the back door of the Meridian, the sky over eastern New Haven was beginning to turn from black to gray. Sterling looked up. 48 hours. The clock had started counting. 9 o'clock the next morning. Jolene sat in a small cafe 4 blocks from the Meridian, across from a man she had never met before. He was about 50 years old, with salt and pepper hair and a calm face. The kind of man no one would remember if he sat in the middle of a crowd, but whose voice no one would forget once they had spoken to him directly. He introduced himself as Grant Holloway, and the first sentence he said made every thought running through Jolene's mind come to a stop. "The man sitting in the dark corner of the bar last night read your message." Jolene didn't move. Her hand tightened around the glass of water on the table. She had tossed and turned all night, lying in bed and listening to Becca's steady breathing beside her, wondering if she had done the right thing or the wrong thing, wondering where that note was now, whose hands it had reached, and whether she would still have a job to go to in the morning. Now she had her answer. Someone had read it, and someone had sent a man to meet her. "He is the owner of the Meridian," Grant continued, his voice even, without emphasis. "He is the head of Cross Empire, the entire restaurant and bar chain, including the place where you work." Jolene opened her mouth, then closed it again. She hadn't known who owned the Meridian. In the 3 years she had worked there, she had only known Briggs as the manager, the man who gave orders, the man who controlled everything. What stood above Briggs, she had never asked, and no one had ever told her. And now she knew that the man sitting in the dark corner last night, the man who ordered the $200 glass of the Sovereign and watched everything with cold gray eyes, was the real owner. She had pushed a note accusing her manager into the hands of the bar's actual owner without even knowing it. "He wants to help you," Grant said, "but he needs you to tell him what you know, the things the books and the USB don't show." Jolene looked at Grant. She was weighing it. The man in front of her could be an ally, or he could be a trap more refined than anything Briggs had ever imagined. But she had already bet everything on that note. Pulling back now wouldn't change anything. "There's one thing the books don't record," Jolene said, her voice low. "Every Thursday night, around 10 o'clock, someone comes to the back door of the basement cold storage. Briggs always sends the staff home early on Thursdays, using low sales or system maintenance as an excuse. Once everyone leaves, only Briggs and 1 or 2 servers he trusts are left behind." She stopped, took a sip of water, then continued. "Once, about 2 months ago, I forgot something in the changing room, so I came back after my shift. I heard voices in the basement. I didn't mean to go down, but the cold storage door was cracked open, and I saw it. 3 or 4 people were moving unlabeled boxes into the storage room. Sealed cardboard boxes, no logos, no barcodes, no delivery slips. Briggs was standing in the corner, on the phone. I clearly heard him say, 'This week's goods are done. Saturday, we deliver the money.'" Grant listened, not writing anything down, but Jolene knew he was remembering every word. "Thursday, they receive the goods. Saturday, they deliver the money," Grant repeated. "Every week?" "Every week, at least since I started paying attention." Jolene nodded. "And those boxes, the liquor inside them isn't like what the official supplier delivers. The bottles don't have import stamps, the labels are printed crooked, and the smell is different. I've been a bartender for 3 years. I know how to tell the difference. That liquor is fake." Grant was silent for a few seconds, processing the information. Then he said, "Thank you, Jolene. This information is very important." He took a small piece of paper from his coat pocket, placed it on the table, and pushed it toward her. On it was a phone number. "This is an emergency contact number. Use it only when you truly need to. If anything unusual happens, call this number immediately." Jolene took the paper and tucked it into her jacket pocket. "From now until Thursday, you go to work as usual," Grant instructed. "Change nothing. Don't look at Briggs differently. Don't talk to your coworkers about this. Don't contact anyone. Everything has to look exactly like every other day. Can you do that?" "I've been hiding everything for months," Jolene said. 2 more days won't be a problem." Grant looked at her for another moment, as if assessing her. Then he nodded and stood. "He will protect you," Grant said before turning away. "I don't promise things I'm not sure of, but I'm sure of this." Jolene sat there alone after Grant left. She looked at the piece of paper with the phone number in her hand. For the first time in months, she felt something other than exhaustion and fear. Not hope, not yet, but the feeling that she wasn't completely alone anymore. At the same time, in the safe apartment on the east side of the city, Sterling listened to Grant's report over the phone. Thursday, the goods came in. Saturday, the money went out. The schedule matched perfectly with the final transaction date recorded in the insurance file on Briggs's USB. Thursday night, Malone would come to the Meridian. Sterling would be there waiting. He called Shaw. "Here's the plan. Let Briggs operate normally. Don't touch him. Don't let him know anything. Thursday night, when Malone comes for the transaction, we close the trap. Place our people to control every entrance and exit at the Meridian. Collect direct evidence of the deal and take both of them." "And after that?" Shaw asked. My lawyers will send the full fake liquor and money laundering file to the FBI anonymously. Let the law handle the public part. I'll handle the rest. Thursday afternoon. Jolene arrived at the Meridian 15 minutes earlier than usual. She had told herself all last night and all morning that everything had to look exactly like every other day. Lower her head, nod, work, go home. Exactly like every other day. For the past 2 days, she had done well. Her Wednesday shift had passed normally. Briggs hadn't looked at her differently, hadn't asked any extra questions, and everything had stayed on rhythm. But today was Thursday. Tonight was the night of the transaction, and something inside Jolene had changed in a way she couldn't control. She knew someone was standing behind her now. She knew the real owner of the Meridian had read the note. She knew something was going to happen tonight. And that knowledge, no matter how much she didn't want it to, had slipped into the way she stood, the way she breathed, the way she looked. Briggs stopped her in the employee hallway as usual, handing her the stack of weekend invoices that needed to be reconciled. And when Jolene took the papers, instead of lowering her head the way instinct had trained her to do over the past several months, she looked straight into his eyes, only for 1 second, not defiant, not angry, just looking straight at him. But for Briggs, that 1 second was more than enough. He was the kind of man who survived on suspicion. He smelled change in people the way a predator smelled, the wind shifting, and the girl standing in front of him today wasn't the same girl who had lowered her head 2 days ago. He didn't say anything right then. He let Jolene go. But 20 minutes later, just as the shift had begun, Briggs appeared at the bar. Jolene. In my office. Jolene set the liquor bottle down, wiped her hands on a towel, and followed him. Her footsteps were steady, but her heart wasn't. Briggs's office. The door closed. Briggs didn't sit down. He leaned against the edge of the desk, arms folded across his chest, looking down at her from above. Who have you been talking to? No one, Jolene answered, her voice flat. No one, Briggs repeated, weighing each sound. Then why are you looking at me differently today? I don't understand what you mean. Briggs slammed his hand down on the desk. The sound was dry, sharp, and loud inside the closed room. Jolene flinched, but she didn't step back. You listen to me carefully, Briggs said, his voice low, each word pressed down like a nail being driven in. If you betray me, you won't find work anywhere in this city. No bar, no restaurant, not even some sidewalk cafe. I'll make sure of that. Do you understand? I understand, Jolene said. Good, get out. Jolene turned, opened the door, and stepped into the hallway. She went straight into the employee restroom, locked the door, and leaned her back against the wall. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't cry. She pulled out her phone, opened a message, and typed in the number Grant had given her, the number he had said to use only in an emergency. Briggs is suspicious. He knows something's wrong. Send. On the east side of the city, Sterling's phone vibrated. He read the message. If Briggs panicked, he would call Malone and cancel tonight's transaction. Both of them would disappear. The evidence would be destroyed, and everything Sterling had prepared over the past 48 hours would dissolve into smoke. Sterling called Grant. Briggs is suspicious. Send him a call from the main office right now. Praise the bar's performance this quarter and inform him about a quarterly bonus. Let him believe no one above him is paying attention to anything. Grant did it in 10 minutes. A call came from Cross Empire's internal number, a female administrative voice, professional and brief. She informed him of the strong quarterly business results, praised manager Warren Briggs, and confirmed that his bonus would be transferred at the end of the month. Briggs took the call in his office. He listened, thanked her, and hung up. His shoulders lowered a little. If the people upstairs were praising him, then no one was looking into him. The bartender girl was probably just him overthinking. But Briggs wasn't the kind of man who ignored risk. He took out his private phone, stepped into the restroom, locked the door, and called a number. Tonight's transaction goes ahead as planned, Briggs said. But the bartender girl, I'm not sure about her. She may know more than I thought. Silence came from the other end of the line. Then Malone's voice, low and slow. Change nothing. Same time, same place. Bring the girl. If she's a risk, I'll handle it. Briggs hung up. At the end of the afternoon shift, when the staff had started slowly cleaning up, Briggs walked to the bar. Jolene, you're staying tonight. Basement inventory. Jolene looked at him. Inventory. Thursday night. The night Briggs always sent everyone home early. She knew this wasn't inventory. "Of course," she said, her voice even. Briggs turned away. Jolene waited until he disappeared behind the VIP room door, then pulled out her phone for the second time that day. "Briggs is keeping me here tonight. On the east side of New Haven." Sterling read the message on the screen. He didn't answer right away. 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which he sat completely still, his thumb resting on the edge of the phone, his eyes fixed on the words while his mind recalculated everything. 3 seconds. And for the first time since this whole thing had begun, Sterling Cross didn't react immediately, because by this moment, the plan was no longer only about trapping Malone and dealing with a traitor. There was a 27-year-old girl being kept inside that building tonight, and she was there because she had dared to write 4 lines on a small piece of paper and push it toward him. Sterling lifted the phone and called Grant. Change of plan. Tonight isn't just about trapping Malone. Tonight we save her. 9 o'clock at night. The Meridian closed earlier than usual. Briggs used refrigeration system maintenance as an excuse and sent the entire staff home 15 minutes early. Everyone except Jolene. The bar slowly emptied, each employee leaving one after another through the back door, the small sounds of laughter and conversation fading little by little until they vanished completely. The lights went out section by section, from the VIP room to the bar area to the employee hallway, until the whole building had only the light in Briggs's office and the basement corridor left burning. Outside, on the streets around the Meridian, Sterling's men had already taken their positions. Every entrance and exit of the building was under control. Sterling's lawyer was waiting in his office, with the anonymous file ready to be sent the moment he received the signal. Inside, Briggs led Jolene down to the basement. The concrete stairwell was narrow, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering, the air growing colder with every step. The cold storage room sat at the end of the basement hallway, behind a thick steel door with a polished stainless steel handle. Briggs opened the door and turned on the light inside. "Inventory every box along the left wall," he said, his voice normal, as if he were assigning an ordinary end-of-shift task. "Write down the quantities, the type, and the delivery date. I need it before tomorrow morning." Jolene stepped into the cold storage room. The cold struck her face immediately, cutting through the thin layer of her uniform and seeping into her skin. She turned back, about to ask Briggs something else, but he had already stepped outside. The steel door closed. The lock turned. Then Briggs's footsteps faded down the hallway. Silence. Jolene stood alone in the middle of the cold storage room. The temperature inside was so low that her breath turned into thin white clouds that dissolved right in front of her face. Around her were rows of boxes stacked along the walls, some labeled, some not, while the white ceiling light poured down with a sterile coldness. She knew this wasn't inventory. Briggs never locked the door when he assigned inventory work, and he never did inventory on a Thursday night, the night he always sent everyone home early. She wrapped her arms around her chest, trying to hold on to warmth. She thought of the last message she had sent. "Briggs is keeping me here tonight." Someone had read that message. Someone had said the plan would change. She didn't know what that plan was, didn't know how it had changed, didn't know whether the gray-eyed man would truly come. She only knew she was here, inside the cold storage room, alone, with the door locked, and Briggs was upstairs preparing for a transaction she wasn't supposed to witness. 10 minutes passed, 20 minutes. The cold sank deeper, from her hands to her shoulders, from her feet up to her knees. Jolene sat down on the concrete floor, drew her legs up, wrapped her arms around her knees, and tried to make her body smaller to preserve heat. Her lips began to pale. Then she heard it. The sound of vehicles above, the sound of a door opening, footsteps, more than one person, moving through the bar area over her head. Briggs's voice, distant and muffled, the words unclear. Then footsteps on the concrete stairs. Several people were coming down to the basement. The cold storage door opened. Briggs entered first, followed by a large, broad-shouldered, middle-aged man in a long black coat, his sharp eyes sweeping the room as quickly as a scanner passing over a code. Behind him came 3 or 4 more men, silent, moving with clean, efficient speed. Malone. Jolene had never met him, had never seen his face, but she knew. She knew by the way Briggs stood beside him, shoulders slightly lower, head slightly bent, his voice shifting into a tone Jolene had never heard before. Half respect, half fear. Malone looked around the cold storage room. Then his gaze stopped on Jolene, curled up in the corner. "This is the girl who knows too much." Briggs nodded. Malone walked toward Jolene. She stood, her back against the wall, with nowhere left to retreat. He looked her up and down, his eyes showing no open cruelty, but no mercy either. The eyes of a man weighing the usefulness of another human being. "You know things you shouldn't know," Malone said, his voice deep and slow. "But I'm a reasonable man. You disappear from this city, don't talk to anyone, don't contact anyone, and I forget your face. Or—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Jolene understood the rest from the way Malone looked at her, from the heavy silence that filled the space after the word "or." Malone's men started working. They opened boxes, checked what was inside, and compared it against records. A black suitcase was placed on the metal table in the center of the room. Briggs opened it, revealing neat stacks of cash inside. He began counting, his fingers moving with quick, practiced familiarity. The transaction unfolded right in front of Jolene's eyes. Fake liquor exchanged for real money. Information exchanged for $2 million. And she stood there, in the corner of the cold storage room, her back against the concrete wall, her lips turning blue, her hands trembling, watching everything while no one cared what she saw, because in Malone's eyes, she was no longer a problem. She would disappear, one way or another. Briggs finished counting the money, closed the suitcase, and nodded to Malone to confirm that the amount was complete. Malone nodded back, then turned to look at Jolene in the corner of the room. She was still standing against the wall, both arms wrapped around her chest, her lips blue, her shoulders trembling from the cold. He walked toward her. One hand slipped into the pocket of his coat, his head tilted slightly, with the look of a man examining one small problem that needed to be solved before he left. "Have you decided yet?" His voice was calm, as if he were asking her what she wanted to order from a menu. Disappear from the city, or the other choice? Jolene didn't answer right away. She looked down at the concrete floor. Her worn black shoes stood on the cold cement. Those shoes had carried her through thousands of night shifts, had kept her standing behind the bar for 3 years, had taken her from one hospital to another, from one debt collection call to the next. She looked at those shoes, and she felt something rise from the pit of her stomach. It wasn't fear anymore. It was anger. Anger because she had lowered her head for too long. Anger because Briggs had used her like a tool for months, and was now standing there selling her to another man as if she were some leftover thing. Anger because a man she had never met before tonight was standing in front of her and asking whether she had made her decision, as if her life were an empty box he had the right to fill in. Jolene stood up. Her legs were shaking. Her knees were stiff from the cold, but her back was straight. She let her arms fall from her chest to her sides, lifted her head, and looked Malone straight in the eyes. "I know enough," she said. Her voice trembled on the first word, but steadied with every word that followed. "And I'm not the only one who knows." Silence. The hum of the refrigeration unit overhead was the only sound in the room. Malone didn't move. His sharp eyes narrowed as he looked at her, as if he were seeing her for the first time. That sentence wasn't a plea. It wasn't an empty threat. It was information, and Malone was a man who understood the value of information. If she was telling the truth, that meant someone else had what she knew, and if she disappeared, that information wouldn't disappear with her. Malone turned to Briggs. "You told me she was just a bartender?" Briggs opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. I didn't think." "You didn't think," Malone cut in, his voice dropping colder by 1 degree. "That's the problem." He turned back to Jolene and took one more step toward her. The distance between them was now barely more than an arm's length. Jolene didn't retreat, not because she was brave, but because the concrete wall was behind her and there was nowhere left to go. And if she couldn't step back, then it was better to stand straight than to shrink. Malone opened his mouth to say something more. Then he stopped. Everyone in the room stopped, because there was a new sound. Footsteps. From the concrete staircase outside the cold storage room, echoing down through the basement hallway. Slow, steady, not hurried. Each step struck the concrete like a knock at a door. One beat, then another, then another. They weren't the footsteps of someone running in. They were the footsteps of a man entering a place he knew he owned. Malone's men turned toward the cold storage door. Briggs froze, his face going pale. Jolene felt her heartbeat change rhythm, shifting from fear into something she couldn't name. The footsteps came closer, closer still. then stopped. A shadow appeared in the doorway of the cold storage room. Sterling Cross stepped in, alone, not hurried, not tense. The cold white light of the storage room fell across his face, and his gray eyes swept over the room, from the boxes to the suitcase of money to Malone's men to Briggs, and finally stopped on Jolene. He looked at her for 1 second. Only then did he turn to Malone, calm, as if he had just walked into the living room of his own home. The whole room froze. Malone's men stopped halfway through opening the boxes. Briggs stood beside the suitcase of money, his hand still resting on the lid, his face drained white. Malone looked at the man who had just walked in, his sharp eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening. Then he recognized him. Cross. One word. Malone's voice changed completely. Gone was the calm of a man who controlled the situation. This was the voice of someone who had just realized the piece on the board wasn't standing where he thought it was. Sterling didn't look at Malone. Not yet. His gray eyes went straight to the corner of the cold storage room, where Jolene was standing. Her back was against the concrete wall, her eyes red, her lips blue, both hands clenched tight in front of her chest. He looked at her. 2 seconds. No nod, no words, but in those 2 seconds, Jolene understood. He had come. He had truly come. Then Sterling turned to Malone. Malone! His voice was even, low, every word clear in the cold air of the storage room. I hear you wanted to buy information about me. The layout of my home, my schedule, the list of my people. Now I'm standing here, free of charge. Malone looked at Sterling, then at the cold storage door behind him, assessing. You came alone, he said. Brave or stupid? I never go anywhere alone, Sterling answered. You just don't see my people. As if that sentence were a signal, sound broke open from every direction at once. The rear door of the cold storage room, the emergency exit at the end of the hallway, the stairs leading down to the basement. Fast, decisive, coordinated footsteps. Shaw appeared at the main entrance of the cold storage room behind Sterling, with 4 more men behind him. At the same time, more men blocked the rear door and the emergency exit. Every way out of the basement was sealed in less than 5 seconds. Malone understood. He wasn't a slow man. He looked around, saw Sterling's people in every direction, saw that there wasn't a single open exit left, and knew he had walked into a trap built with precision. He turned to Briggs, his eyes flaring. You led me into a trap, Briggs stammered, both hands raised to chest level as he backed away. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't. You didn't know. Malone cut him off. His voice like steel dragged across stone. Malone's men reacted on instinct. One shoved a stack of boxes toward the door, trying to create a path. Another lunged for the stairs. Chaos burst open for a few seconds, but it ended faster than it began. Shaw and his team moved fast and clean, without one wasted motion. Malone's men were restrained before they could get beyond the cold storage room. Malone himself was stopped in the middle of the room, 2 of Sterling's men standing close on either side of him. Not touching him, but near enough for him to understand that any movement would be a mistake. Briggs tried to run up the stairs, but he was stopped on the 3rd step. He stood there, his back against the railing, breathing hard, his eyes darting from Sterling to Malone to Shaw, searching for an exit that didn't exist. Sterling walked past Briggs without looking at him, as if stepping past an object blocking the way. He went straight to Malone and stopped 1 step away from him. The 2 men stood facing each other in the middle of the cold storage room. Malone was half a head taller than Sterling, broader in the shoulders, larger in build. But in that space, beneath the cold white lights, Sterling Cross filled the room with a presence that needed neither height nor muscle. He spoke quietly, low enough for only Malone to hear. My father died because he trusted the wrong man. I don't make that mistake. He paused for 1 beat. But you just did. Malone said nothing. For the first time that night, he had nothing to say. Sterling turned away and walked back to the center of the room. He looked at Shaw and gave the order in a normal voice, as if arranging a morning meeting. Hold Malone and all his men. Turn over every piece of evidence from tonight's transaction to the lawyers. The fake liquor files, the money laundering records, the receipts, the surveillance footage. The FBI will have everything on their desk tomorrow morning. Shaw nodded. Sterling looked toward Briggs, who stood trembling at the foot of the stairs, held between 2 men. Sterling said nothing to Briggs. Not yet. That part would come later. The rest, Sterling said, his voice lower, his eyes sweeping across the room one final time. I'll handle. Sterling's men began to move. Malone's people were led out of the cold storage room through the rear door. Malone walked between two men, his back straight, not struggling. But the look in his eyes as he passed Sterling held something he could no longer hide. It was the look of a man who knew he had lost. The suitcase of money still sat on the metal table, its lid open, the cash inside gone cold. The boxes of fake liquor lined the wall, and in the corner of the cold storage room, Jolene Prescott still stood with her back against the concrete wall, watching everything with wide amber eyes, unable to say a single word. The last footsteps faded up the stairs, then disappeared completely. The door above closed. The basement sank into silence, with only the steady hum of the refrigeration unit overhead, a flat, monotonous sound filling the space the chaos had just left behind. The cold storage room was empty now. Shaw had taken the suitcase of money away, along with all the evidence. The boxes of fake liquor still lined the walls, motionless, like silent witnesses, and in the corner of the room, Jolene was still standing in the exact place where she had stood for the past hour. Her back was against the concrete wall, both arms wrapped tightly around her chest, her shoulders drawn inward, her whole body trembling lightly but constantly. Not from fear anymore, from cold. The cold had soaked deep into her body during the time she had been locked in there, from skin into flesh, from flesh into bone. Her lips were still blue, her fingertips were white. Sterling stepped past the boxes in the middle of the room and walked to her. He stopped one step away. He said nothing. He took off his suit jacket, held it with both hands, and draped it over Jolene's shoulders. The jacket was still warm from his body, heavier than she had expected, the soft fabric settling over her trembling shoulders like words that didn't need to be spoken. Sterling sat down on the concrete floor beside her, his back against the same wall. He didn't pull her down, didn't take her hand, didn't say, "It's all right now," or any of the comforting sentences people usually said in moments like that. He simply sat beside her, his back straight, both hands resting on his knees, his eyes facing forward, as if he were saying, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You can breathe." Jolene remained standing for a few more seconds, then her legs gave out. She slid down the wall and sat beside him on the cold floor, the suit jacket wrapped over her shoulders, both knees drawn close to her chest. Silence. A long silence, only the sound of the refrigeration unit and the breathing of two people. Then Jolene spoke, her voice soft, slightly hoarse from the cold. "I thought I wasn't going to make it out of here." Sterling turned to look at her. "No one can touch you anymore. I promise." Jolene didn't answer right away. She looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time since she had met him at the bar that night. The gray eyes she had once thought were cold when he sat watching the bar, cold when he walked down the stairs to face Malone, cold when he told Malone that his father had died because he trusted the wrong man. But now, under the pale white light of the cold storage room, when only the two of them were sitting on the concrete floor, she looked into those eyes and no longer saw coldness. She saw something buried very deep behind them, something Sterling perhaps guarded more carefully than any secret in his empire. Loneliness. Not the kind of loneliness that comes from having no one around, the kind that belongs to a man with the whole world around him and not a single person who dares to tell him the truth. "Why are you helping me?" Jolene asked. "I'm just a bartender." Sterling looked at her for a moment before answering. "Because you're the only person in this building who dared to tell the truth. I've been looking for that my whole life." Nothing more came after that sentence. Nothing needed to. The two of them sat side by side on the concrete floor of the cold storage room, among the boxes of fake liquor and the remains of a transaction that had just been shattered. The most powerful boss in New Haven, and a bartender with calloused hands, sitting on the cold floor, their shoulders nearly touching, neither of them saying another word. Above them, the Meridian remained dark. Outside, New Haven was still awake, but inside this cold storage room, in this moment, the world had narrowed down to only two people, and the silence between them, a silence that wasn't heavy, but strangely, became the warmest thing either of them had felt in a very long time. Sterling left the cold storage room, climbed the stairs, passed through the basement hallway, went up to the ground floor, walked along the employee corridor, and stopped in front of Briggs's office. The door was already open. Two of Sterling's men stood outside. Inside, Warren Briggs sat in the very chair where he had once sat, while ordering Jolene to alter the books, while threatening her, while believing he was the one who held power in this room. Now he sat there, his face pale green, sweat beading across his forehead, both hands resting on his thighs, his fingers trembling. He looked much smaller than the man Jolene had been forced to bow her head to for the past several months. Sterling stepped inside and closed the door. He didn't sit. He stood across from Briggs, his hands in his trouser pockets, looking down at the man seated in the chair. Not hurried, not openly angry, just calm in a way that was terrifying. "You stole my money," Sterling said. "I could overlook that. Money can be made again. You sold my information to Malone, the layout of my home, my schedule, the list of my people. I can understand that. In this business, loyalty is a luxury." He stopped. "But you used a girl. She made one small mistake because she was exhausted, and you turned it into a noose. You invented a debt so you could pressure her, threatened the only job keeping her and her family alive, and forced her to alter the books to hide your crimes. You turned an innocent person into a hostage so you could sleep peacefully. That I don't overlook." Briggs opened his mouth. His lips moved several times before words finally came out. "She's involved too," he said, his voice shaking, trying to cling to the last rope left. "She altered the books for me. She knew everything and still did it. She isn't a victim. She's an accomplice." Sterling took his phone from his pocket, opened a video file, placed it on the desk, and turned the screen toward Briggs. On the screen, Briggs himself, in this very room, was standing close to Jolene's face, his voice ringing clearly through the speaker. "You fix these numbers before Friday. If you don't, I'll call your landlord and every restaurant in the city. You won't find work anywhere." The image showed Jolene lowering her head, nodding, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. Sterling turned off the video. "Proof that she was forced. From your own USB. You recorded it yourself, saved it yourself, and hid it under the floor yourself. You called it insurance. I call it a sentence." Briggs looked at the dark screen, then looked up at Sterling. The final rope had just snapped. There was nothing left to hold on to. "You'll sign a full confession," Sterling said. "All of it. The fake liquor, the money laundering, Pinnacle Spirits, Malone, everything. My lawyers will send the confession along with the evidence file to the FBI tomorrow morning." He leaned down, both hands braced on the desk, his face less than half a meter from Briggs's. His voice dropped low, almost a whisper, but every word cut sharp as a blade. "And if in prison, you mention the name Jolene Prescott, even once, to anyone, under any circumstance, I'll know, and then there won't be anyone standing between me and you." Sterling straightened. From the inner pocket of his jacket, he took out a printed sheet of paper and placed it on the desk with a pen. "The confession." Briggs looked at the paper, looked at the pen, looked at Sterling, then looked back at the paper. He picked up the pen. His hand shook so badly that the tip tapped against the desktop 2 or 3 times before it finally touched the paper. He signed. The handwriting was crooked, almost unreadable, but it was a signature, and Sterling didn't need it to be beautiful. He picked up the paper, folded it, and slipped it into his inner pocket. Then he turned and walked out of the office without looking at Briggs one more time. The door closed. Inside, Warren Briggs sat alone in the chair he had once thought was his throne, both hands still trembling, staring at the pen left on the desk, and for the first time, he understood what it meant to sit in his own room and no longer own a single thing inside it. Dawn. Jolene opened the apartment door with her key, gently, trying not to make a sound. The apartment was dark, with only the small, warm yellow nightlight from Becca's room spilling into the hallway. Mrs. Wilson from next door was dozing on the sofa, the television turned low. Jolene lightly touched her shoulder and whispered her thanks. "Mrs." Wilson nodded, patted Jolene's hand once, then quietly went back to her own apartment. Jolene closed the door and locked it. She stood in the hallway for a while, listening. The apartment was quiet. The old refrigerator hummed softly in the kitchen. The wall clock moved 1 second at a time, and from the bedroom came the steady sound of Becca breathing. She stepped into her sister's room. Becca lay curled on the bed, the blanket pulled up to her chin, brown hair spread across the pillow, her mouth slightly open. The drawing of the house with the flower garden that she had made the other day lay on the bedside table, beside the box of crayons and the old stuffed rabbit with worn ears. Jolene sat down on the edge of the bed, gently, trying not to make the mattress sink. She watched her sister sleep. Becca's chest rose and fell lightly, evenly, so small beneath the blanket. Her little face was peaceful, without worry, without fear, knowing nothing about what had happened tonight, about the cold storage room, about Malone, about the note beneath the base of the glass, about all of it. To Becca, the world was still a place where Jolene went to work and came home, where Mrs. Wilson came over to watch her, where there were crayons and drawings and the question, "When do I get to go back to the hospital?" Jolene held her hand, such a tiny warm hand, resting completely inside Jolene's calloused palm. She leaned down and whispered, her voice barely loud enough for herself to hear, "I'm sorry I made you wait so long, but I found a way. You're going to be okay." Becca didn't wake. She kept sleeping, her breathing still even, her small fingers closing slightly around Jolene's finger in an unconscious reflex. And Jolene cried. For the first time in a very long time, she let the tears fall without trying to stop them. They weren't tears of despair, not the kind of tears she had swallowed every night after Becca fell asleep, while she sat alone at the kitchen table staring at the pile of bills. These were tears of relief, the tears of someone who had just stepped through to the other side of a tunnel and seen light. She sat there, holding her sister's hand, crying without a sound, until the sky beyond the window shifted from gray to pale pink. That afternoon, the Meridian was closed. No shift, no staff. The bar was empty, the chairs stacked on the counter, the lights off. Jolene came because of Grant's message. She entered through the employee door, walked down the familiar hallway, and stopped in front of Briggs's office. The door was open. Inside, Sterling Cross stood beside the window, his hands in his trouser pockets, looking outside. The office looked emptier than she remembered. Briggs's things had been cleared away, the bookshelf empty, the walls bare, the desk holding only a clean wooden surface. The room she had once been afraid to enter was now just four walls and afternoon sunlight falling through the glass. Sterling turned when he heard her. Only the two of them were in the room. "The bar needs a new manager," Sterling said. "No circling around. No long opening. Someone I can trust. You have a finance background. You know every corner of this place. And you're the only person here who didn't sell your soul to Briggs, manager of the Meridian, and responsible for overseeing the finances of my entire business chain. The job is yours if you want it." Jolene looked at him. "I'm just a bartender." "I was just a boy who lost his father at 19, Sterling replied. "And then what?" Silence filled the room. The afternoon light moved slowly across the wooden desk. Jolene swallowed. "And the debt Briggs made up? It doesn't exist. Not from today on." Sterling continued, his voice unchanged, still even, still flat. But she heard something beneath that calm surface, something she had briefly seen in the cold storage room the night before. "And your sister. Grant will send you the information about a medical fund I've just created. Surgery, treatment, follow-up care. For life. You don't need to worry about that anymore." Jolene stood in the middle of the office, both arms at her sides, and she felt her knees soften. Not from fear, not from exhaustion, but because she had just heard two words she hadn't dared to think about for the past 3 years. For life. Becca would have surgery. Becca would receive treatment. No worrying about money. No 30-day countdown. No lying awake every night doing calculations that had no answer. Tears ran down her cheeks for the second time that day, and she didn't bother wiping them away. Sterling looked at her. "I need you to say it." Jolene took a breath. Her voice trembled, but it was clear. "I accept." 3 weeks later, New Haven Central Hospital, 4th floor, pediatric ward. The hallway was bright and clean, with drawings of animals on the walls, and the faint smell of disinfectant mixed with the scent of fresh flowers from the patient rooms. Jolene walked through the door of room 32, holding a small bouquet of yellow daisies, and saw Becca. Her little sister was sitting propped against the pillows, her skin rosy, her eyes bright, her brown hair neatly brushed to both sides by someone. Becca was drawing. On her lap was a new sketchbook, crayons scattered across the blanket, and she was coloring a picture of two people standing side by side in front of a big house, with a flower garden and a smiling sun in the upper corner. It looked exactly like the picture she had drawn at home the other day, but this time, the tree beside the house looked bigger and stronger. Becca looked up when she heard the footsteps, and her face opened into such a wide smile that her eyes narrowed into two little curves. "Joe." Jolene placed the flowers on the bedside table, sat on the edge of the bed, and pulled her sister into her arms. Becca hugged her back, her small arms circling Jolene's neck. "How are you feeling?" Jolene asked softly, stroking her hair. "I'm really good," Becca said, her voice clear and full of pride. "The doctor said I did so good. The doctor said I'm the bravest girl on this whole floor." Jolene laughed, the kind of laugh her face had forgotten how to make for years. A laugh that wasn't forced, wasn't practiced, wasn't hiding anything behind it. Just a laugh. The two sisters were talking about the new drawing when the hospital room door opened again. Sterling Cross stepped inside, and both Jolene and the most powerful boss in New Haven paused for a beat. Sterling stood in the doorway, wearing a black shirt without a suit jacket, his right hand holding a light brown teddy bear almost half Becca's size. He stood there, holding the teddy bear, looking at the pediatric hospital room with the drawings on the walls and the crayons on the blanket, and he looked completely out of place. The boss of the Cross Syndicate, the man who had brought down Malone and Briggs in the same night, the man who had made a traitor cry while signing a confession, was standing in the doorway of a child's hospital room with a teddy bear in his hand, not knowing whether he should step in or stay where he was. Becca looked at him, tilted her head, her big round eyes full of curiosity. "Who are you?" Sterling looked at Jolene. She looked back at him, the corner of her mouth curving slightly. He turned to Becca. "I'm Joe's friend." Becca's eyes widened. She looked at the teddy bear, then up at Sterling's face, then back at the teddy bear. "Is that for me?" Sterling walked over and placed the teddy bear beside Becca on the bed. She immediately hugged it, burying her face in its soft belly and giggling. "Joe's friend is really nice," Becca said, her voice half swallowed by the bear's fur. Sterling said nothing. He stood beside the bed, watching the 8-year-old child hug the teddy bear he had spent 10 minutes choosing in front of a toy store. And Jolene saw something perhaps no one in Sterling's organization had ever seen. Those gray eyes, the eyes she had seen cold, had seen ruthless, had seen lonely, softened. Not much, just enough for her to notice. Sterling stayed a few more minutes, standing beside the window while Becca showed Jolene the teddy bear and said she would name it Sunny because it was brown like late afternoon sunlight. Then he gave Jolene a small nod and stepped outside. The hospital hallway was quiet. Sterling leaned back against the wall across from room 32 and looked through the small window in the door. Jolene was sitting on the bed beside Becca, the two sisters laughing, Becca lifting the teddy bear up to show her sister that it already had a name, while afternoon sunlight came through the hospital room window and fell across Becca's face, across Jolene's hair, across the teddy bear named Sunny. Sterling stood there, watching. His right hand slid into his trouser pocket, his fingers touching the old mechanical watch. He wasn't wearing it today. He kept it in his pocket, close to him, as always. His fingers moved over the glass face of the watch, feeling the second hand still turning steadily beneath it, the only thing his father had left behind. He looked at the two sisters in the hospital room for a while longer. Then he turned away. His footsteps sounded softly and evenly down the hospital hallway, still heavy, but a little lighter. There are people in this world whose power comes from money, from the fear they spread, but there is one kind of strength no one can buy, and that is the integrity of a person who dares to do what is right when the whole world has forced them into silence. Jolene had no money, no power, no one to protect her. She had only a small piece of paper and courage, but that piece of paper exposed a traitor, protected an entire empire, and changed the lives of two people. And Sterling, the man who held absolute power but had spent his whole life trusting no one, finally found what he had been searching for across 14 years. Faith in another human being. Not faith born from contracts or vows of loyalty, but from a bartender who had nothing in her hands and still chose to do the right thing. Sometimes, the greatest strength doesn't belong to the one who holds power, but to the one who dares to stand up when no one is standing with them. If this story touched your heart, please like and share it with those who need to hear that courage doesn't need a title. How did this story make you feel? Leave a comment and share what you feel from deep in your heart. We're always listening. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new stories every day. Wishing everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace every single day. Goodbye, and I'll see you in the next video.